Now we are going to start a new chapter, metals and nonmetals. All of you know that there are 118 elements known at present. There are similarities as well as differences in their properties of these elements. What is an element? An element is a substance that cannot be broken into more simpler substances. These are classified into different groups: metals, non-metals and metalloids. These are the main three groups. Okay, out of these main groups, the elements are divided into main two groups that we are going to study. All the elements can be divided into two main groups, that is metals and non-metals. Both metals and non-metals are used in our daily life. We also use a large number of compounds of metals and non-metals. So what is a metal? Metals, all of you know that it is element that conduct heat and electricity and are malleable and ductile. Example: sodium, iron, aluminium, gold, etc. Non-metals are elements that do not conduct heat and electricity and are neither malleable nor ductile. Oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, etc. All of you have studied in the lower classes about metals and non-metals. Then the terms malleable, ductile, conductors, all these you have studied in lower classes. In this chapter, we have to study physical property and chemical property of metals and non-metals. So, let us discuss the physical properties of metals and non-metals. Already you know the important properties of metals and non-metals. You already studied in lower classes. The first term, the first property we are going to discuss is malleability. So when I say malleability, in your mind, it is the process in which we can beaten into thin sheets. Already we studied in 9th standard. So the malleability is the process of beating into thin sheet. This property we call them as malleability. We know that metals are malleable, but non-metals are not malleable, but they are brittle. Brittle means pottipona. So metals are malleable, that can be beaten into thin sheets with a hammer, and non-metals are not malleable, which will break if you beaten. Okay, so metals are malleable, non-metals are brittle in nature. Second property is ductility. What do you mean by ductility? The process of drawing into thin wires. So metals can be drawn into thin wires. That means they are ductile in nature. What about non-metals? They are not ductile because they are brittle. When they beaten or when they drawn into thin wire or when they stretch, it will break. That is, it is brittle in nature. Third property is electrical conductivity and thermal conductivity. Whether they are good conductors of heat or electricity. All of you know that metals are good conductor of heat and electricity because of free mobile electrons in it. We know that metals are electropositive in nature, and non-metals are poor conductor of heat and electricity. Okay, they will not allow heat or electricity to pass. The fourth property is luster. Luster means shine. So metals are lustrous and can be polished. They are shiny in nature. But what about non-metals? Non-metals are non-lustrous. Non-metals are non-lustrous. That means they are not shiny. They are dull in nature. They do not have a shining surface. The fifth property is hardness. We know that metals are hard in nature. Exceptions are there, we will study later. Most of the metals are hard, but non-metals are soft in nature. Non-metals are generally soft in nature. There also we will study the exceptional case. Then physical states. Metals are solid at room temperature. So metals are solid at room temperature, except mercury is the only metal which is liquid in nature. All other metals, iron, copper, aluminum, all these are solid at room temperature. What about non-metals? Non-metals can be solid, liquid or gaseous state. So non-metals may be solid, liquid or gases at room temperature. They can exist in all the three states, all the three physical states. Carbon, sulfur and phosphorus are solid in nature. But bromine is the only non-matter which is liquid in nature. Whereas hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, chlorine, all these are non-metals which are gaseous in nature. Then the seventh property is melting point and boiling point. We know that metals have high melting point and boiling point. There are also exceptions. Sodium and potassium metals have low boiling point and melting point, whereas iron metal have high melting point, about 1535 degrees Celsius. That means that solid iron metal and turns into liquid iron on heating at a high temperature, that is about 1535 degrees Celsius. Copper is also a high metal having high melting point, 1083 degrees Celsius. But exceptional cases are there. Sodium and potassium metals which have a very low boiling point, that is 98 degrees Celsius, and that of a potassium is 64 degrees Celsius. Even other metals like gallium and cesium, they have very low melting point, around 30 degrees Celsius and 28 degrees Celsius. They will even melt at room temperature. That is, if we are keeping in our hand itself, it will melt. So that much low melting point it has. Then what about non-metals? Non-metals have comparatively low melting point and boiling point. There also we can see an exceptional case, diamond. Diamond, which is a non-metal having a high melting point and boiling point. Then sulfur. Sulfur is also having low melting point, about 115 degrees Celsius, which is very quite low. Then melting point of diamond is about more than iron, that is 3500 degrees Celsius, which is very high. Next is sonority. So what is sonorous? Metals are sonorous in nature. What is the meaning of sonorous? It produces sound. So when it beaten, it produces sound. That's why it is the term used sonorous. So metals are sonorous. The metals make sound when we hit with an object. Okay, so they produce sound. We know that metal pieces or the electric bulbs are used for making bells. Metals are used for making bells. So when they heat, they produces sound. The strings of the musical instruments, all these are made up of metals. When they strike, it produces sound. So metals are sonorous in nature. What about non-metals? They are non-sonorous. They do not produce sound when hit with an object. Then about density. So metals have high density. We studied that all these metals are solid in nature, so naturally they have high density. There are also exceptions, sodium and potassium metals, which have low density. Then about the non-metals have low density. Non-metals are usually have low density because non-metals are light substances. They are light in nature. The sulfur is having a density 2 gram per centimeter cube, so which is quite low. Then about the color, metals, most of the metals are gray in color. Okay, they are gray in color except copper, gold, etc. have color. That is, copper has reddish brown color, whereas gold has a yellow color. What about non-metals? Non-metals have many different colors. Sulfur is yellow in color, phosphorus white in color or red in color. Phosphorus exists in two colors, white or red. Then graphite is black in color, chlorine is yellowish green in color, whereas hydrogen and oxygen are colorless. So they have many different colors. They exist in different colors. So these are the physical properties that we compare the metals and non-metals. So these are the physical properties of metals and non-metals.